Welcome to Big Tent USA. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Kitty Douglas, and I'm so excited to host tonight's event with John Della Volpe and Brianna Cea. At Big Tent USA, we put democracy above partisanship. There are 39 days until the election, so join us in doing something. In honor of tonight's conversation, we have letters to Gen Z voters in key states. So please email us at activism@bigtentusa.org and request letters to those voters. We have a lot more to do as well, so visit our Do Something page to take a look at other opportunities and share the links with your friends and family. John Della Volpe is the director of polling at the Harvard Kennedy School Institute of Politics and the author of Fight: How Gen Z is Channeling Their Fear and Passion to Save America. The Washington Post referred to John as one of the world's leading authorities on global sentiment, opinion, and influence, especially among young Americans and in the age of digital and social media. John is also the founder of Social Sphere, a Cambridge-based politics, public opinion, and analytics company. He appears regularly on MSNBC's Morning Joe, and he is the executive producer of The Power of Z, the soon-to-be released documentary about Gen Z, which you can stream or view on the website on October 7th. After John shows a clip of Gen Z focus groups and shares his most recent polling, we will be joined by the one and only Brianna Cea. Brianna is the executive director and founder of GenVote, a skilled youth voting rights organizer and advocate for the AAPI community in New York City. Cea is a frequent media commentator on youth voting issues and has been featured in Good Morning America, WNYC, NPR, Vox News, as well as in USA Today and Ms. Magazine, among other outlets. Brianna is the past president of the OCA, Asian Pacific Advocates New York, and was the youngest chapter president of the OCA National Board, where she was dedicated to advancing the social and political well-being of Asian Americans in New York City. Welcome to Big Tent, John and Brianna. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to John.
Thanks so much, Kitty. Thank you, Big Tent. Thanks to everyone joining us, especially folks from Florida. I hope you are, as Kitty said, safe and sound. Before we start the conversation in the evening tonight, I would like to cue up an excerpt from our documentary, The Power of Z. This comes from a couple of sets of large focus groups and conversations that I held with members of Gen Z just a few weeks ago from Charlotte and Minneapolis. So let's take a watch.
Okay, first sticks. Go ahead.
Action.
Cool. So my name is John. Thank you so much for spending a couple of hours with us today. You are members of Generation Z. The thing about generations is that generally they are developed based upon a group of people having a common set of experiences. So if we think about Gen Z, what are some of those experiences that have shaped you and your generation?
Roe v. Wade being appealed into the negative thing.
Roe v. Wade.
Yeah.
That was very negative, yeah.
Just a male having control over your body and he has no idea what it's like to be in your shoes. Like, guys don't know how it feels to get pregnant. Guys don't know how it feels to have a pregnancy scare. Guys don't know how it feels to have a period and you can't wake up or go to work or just do regular stuff. Like, and you want to have control over my entire body. No, sir.
You know, when Roe v. Wade got overturned, like, I just remember feeling like, what am I gonna do? You know, like, what am I gonna do if I'm ever put in a situation, you know, where I need that medical care and I'm not able to access it because of this thing happening?
So if we think about Gen Z, there's one topic here that I often hear.
Climate change?
Climate change, that's one. There's another one I was thinking about. School shootings, gun violence.
Oh, that's kind of like normal to us.
Right, I was
Like,
just gonna
kinda
say,
like-
it's like we've become so, like, accustomed, and that is like the normal, which is really disturbing, right? That we,
Yeah, we didn't even think to like.
Yeah.
My sister was, last year at the Mall of America when a shooter was there and had to hide in a store, and it's like, God, you can't even go out.
Who else here? Raise your hand if you also had to deal with like death at a young age, right? Like in a significant way, a friend, classmate, someone in your community. Raise your hand. Okay, almost probably a third, maybe half of you. Anyone have an experience with a shooting, with gun violence as the cause of that?
I think the first shootout I was in, I don't know if I'd say in, but it
Yeah, I
happened.
wouldn't say in, but I was.
Yeah, like we were walking up the stairs to go inside the apartment, and this gunman was creeping to try to kill a dude across the street, and he saw my older cousin, and he just went like that and started shooting. So like, just being in scenarios like
How
that.
old were you?
Ooh, 7.
7?
The Sandy Hook
Yeah,
school
that's what
shooting
I-
really disillusionized young me to a lot
Yeah.
of stuff.
Okay. How old were you then, roughly?
12.
You were 12.
I don't know. I feel like from that moment forward, and then all the school shootings that we started to have, like reoccurringly after that, it changed how parents are and how kids are now.
Does anyone remember specifically the impact and what it felt like as a young boy or girl during the Great Recession, 08, 09?
You could see your friends were struggling and you didn't really understand why. Your parents were tight on money, scared. And then it made me very aware of money and how I spend my money and saving and what I'm supposed to be doing with it.
I really noticed, again, like with my parents, like we had never really been super well off. Like we've never owned a house up until recently. But having moved, we moved states, and then my dad lost his job, and then
You
it's
moved
just-
states because of the recession?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah, the job that we had moved for, he lost, unfortunately. So it kind of weighs on you as a child, and then I am the oldest of 4, so I had to explain to my siblings, like, don't ask mom and dad for a new Wii, don't ask mom and dad for, a candy bar or anything, because they're gonna say no.
We just couldn't make bills meet. We took tents, and my grandmother's house didn't have enough actual physical room in the house, so we had tents out on her front yard because we couldn't. We were just trying to save enough money to make a down payment and get in somewhere.
What's wrong here? What is wrong in Charlotte or North Carolina or the United States where I randomly choose 12 people? I don't think we interviewed you and asked you if you're in homelessness, right? What is wrong?
I think my biggest stressor right now is anything financial. I think minimum wage hasn't changed since you were 22, but the price of an apartment has tripled, So we as Gen Z, I feel like I've been talking about this a lot, we have to make 3 jobs just to make ends meet, and that's not fun money, that's money so that we're not homeless on the streets. I feel like Gen Z has to work 3 times as hard and not get any of the payout at all.
People feel, like they're being pushed, to extremes. I mean, we've had such a huge rise in issues with mental health. Suicide is as high as it's ever been in this country, and we're trying really hard to pull ourselves out of this hole, and we're not too sure who dug it, and sometimes it feels like we're digging it ourselves. It's been tough how it feels like there's just been this sort of like never-ending setback, like running as hard as we can to stay in the same place.
Let's talk about politics today, right?
I think the way, voting has gone so far, and just, how passionate our generation seems to be about these things, hopefully that translates into actual, policy change and societal change, throughout that. I'm hopeful that's possible.
How do I put this into words? Obviously, I'm not going with Trump for obvious reasons, but I feel like I just don't know anything about the other candidate, Kamala. Really don't know anything about her. I just feel that if you're asking for somebody's vote, you should be doing everything in your power to make sure they know exactly who they're voting for. I just don't think she's done that so far.
I think a big issue I have right now is that there's so many who have issues with the current government but aren't voting. And I think it's just mind-boggling to me that it's like, you want to make change, but you're not taking the steps. And we have an opportunity to be informed and to know exactly who we're voting for and what we stand for. And it's just, we need to take those steps.
Well done. Thank you, guys. You guys are terrific. Okay, great. Well, I appreciate BigTent from allowing us to show that. I think that's the first time we show that to an extended group of people. And not only, I think, is that a really good basis to understand what we call the Gen Z origin story, but it's actually a pretty good portrait in terms of how I spend, a couple of nights, a couple of weeks at least, a month in terms of what I do. I've been fortunate to be the polling director at the Institute of Politics now for 25 years, and it's to really, I think, understand Gen Z, to understand the electorate, to understand the future of America. It requires spending time with young people and not always asking them whether they support or oppose a particular policy, but what makes a good day, what keeps them up at night, what are their hopes and dreams and fears about the future. So I thought that clip did a pretty excellent job providing some background. Just a couple of more things about my views of Gen Z before I share the polling that we just released a couple of days ago from Harvard. I argue in my book Fight that no generation since the greatest generation has dealt with more chaos more quickly than younger people today, members of Gen Z. These are young people from roughly middle school age through the mid-20s who, as we could see in that clip, from the moments that from their first significant memories, there's like this through line of a lack of stability in their lives. This is a generation who doesn't remember 9/11. Millennials do, but this is a generation whose first memories often were surrounded, were in the kind of the disquiet and insecurity that too many families were facing during the Great Recession. We heard from a young member of the generation from Minnesota who found himself homeless at the age of 5, and 18 years later found himself homeless again. As they entered elementary school, too many remember the time, their first memories of school, they still give them nightmares, was when they were hiding under the desks for red alert school shooter drills. By the time this generation, entered 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, too many members of the community were lost to opioid abuse, addiction, death by suicide, etc. And then you enter the period where Donald Trump becomes president, and the whiplash from no drama Obama era to Trump, where it was really challenging to make sense of what a Muslim ban would mean, or pulling out of the Paris Accord, or potentially dismantling the Affordable Care Act. These are events that I think have significantly shaped this generation. After that, we had the Parkland shooting, we had the climate strike from Greta Thunberg, and of course, George Floyd's murder, Me Too, and others. What makes me so optimistic about this country is that when folks are faced with, in my view, that kind of trauma, especially before the human brain isn't fully mature, which is in the mid-20s, there are two choices. You could flee or you can fight. And so many members of Brianna's generation, who we're going to bring in a few minutes, have decided to not melt like snowflakes, but these experiences I think have hardened their perspective and determined to do what they can to make their own lives, their communities, and the countries better by voting and by participating. When Gen Z entered the electorate in 2018, and then again in 2020, we saw record turnout levels. No generation at this age has voted more and participated more in politics than Gen Z. And whether you're Democrat or Republican, the deal is that without Gen Z, Donald Trump would be president today. Democrats generally aren't competitive with voters over the age of 45. Republicans win that cohort time and time and time again. It is because of the combination of record turnout and the strong preference for Democrats that Biden back in 2020 was able to flip 5 battleground states from red to blue. So that's like the history of I think of Gen Z. Now let's talk about the present. I was mentioned by Kitty, released the 48th edition of the Harvard Youth Poll just a couple of days ago. There's been a lot written about it, but what I'll do is I want to walk you quickly through some of the top findings that my students and I presented earlier this week. I think the first thing is, from a perspective of where we were 6 months ago, essentially we do 2 editions of this poll a year. The last one was in the spring. The present one, as I said, was just released. And what's happened is a one-time 13-point lead for Democrats, for Joe Biden, back in the spring, is now a 31-point lead for Kamala Harris in a multi-candidate 5-person race. What I call like the magic number that Democrats need to achieve in terms of vote share to be competitive at a state or national basis is 60%. Joe Biden was able to get there in 2020. He got 61%. I was unsure that he could get there this cycle, but Kamala Harris, as of now, is there. She's at 61%. It's a 31-point lead. She's doubled up Donald Trump's number, which is at 30%. So that's good. One. The second thing is we talk a lot about the gender gap among younger people. There is a gender gap. Likely female voters, 7 out of 10 are supporting Kamala Harris right now. But lost in the gender gap conversation is the fact that as of now, Kamala Harris is also winning a majority of young men, something that wasn't the case a few months ago. This summer, she's winning among younger men, and there isn't a demographic group in the generation where she hasn't improved significantly compared to where President Biden, who I think, by the way, has had a more youth-forward agenda and series of accomplishments than any other president in decades. Despite that, she's improved every single group: men, women, younger, older, college students, non-college students, white, Black, and Hispanics. Democrats were trailing among young whites by 2 points. She's now leading by 15 points. So that's number one. She is in control of the multi-candidate field, horse race, and likely to reach 60% if she continues that level of success with this group. One. The second thing is we see that a majority are indicating that they are, quote, definitely likely to vote. We had record turnout 4 years ago. We are a shade behind that right now. However, the reason is that we're behind that is younger Democrats compared to 6 months ago are significantly more likely to vote. It's younger Republicans who are less likely to vote than 6 months ago. There's actually a 14-point difference between the enthusiasm for participating among young Democrats, which is at 74%, whereas young Republicans are at 60%, actually taking a step backwards relative to our spring Harvard IOP poll. Perhaps more important, in my view, than understanding the horse race is taking a look at 2 things: the personal characteristics and attributes that young people assign to candidates and also who they prefer on certain issues. This is significant. Among likely voters, by at least 30 points, they see Kamala Harris as being more empathetic, more relatable, more honest, more competent. By 20 points, they see her stronger, including the fact that younger men who are likely to vote see Kamala Harris and not Donald Trump as the quote, stronger candidate. When we look ahead at the key issues that young people care about and see which candidate they prefer or trust on each issue, we see, by 30, 40-point margins, Kamala Harris is trusted on climate, on abortion, on education, on healthcare, on gun violence prevention, on strengthening the working class. And when we look at the economy, again, Trump had two things going for him: strength in the economy. He is losing on strength, and he's also losing among young likely voters in the economy by double digits, by 12 points. The last thing I'll just note is some views on favorable views on some elected officials, some candidates, and also on Project 2025. The headline here is that there's been, again, a double-digit switch and improvement of younger voters on Kamala Harris's job performance as VP, but she's also viewed more favorably than negatively on her fave-unfave. Tim Walz, 36 fave, 22 unfave, which stands in stark comparison to Trump and J.D. Vance. By a margin of 2-1, more young people see Trump in a negative rather than positive light, and by a 3-1 margin, people see his running mate J.D. Vance in a negative compared to positive light. 18% fave, 46% unfave. So those are essentially the headlines from the last Harvard poll. And before I move on, I'd love to bring kind of Brianna into the conversation and get your perspective and some others as well as we talk about Gen Z. Hey, Brianna.
Awesome. Hey, everyone. Hi, John. Really appreciated the video. I deeply resonated with so many of the moments that young people were sharing, like hearing the young folks talk about Sandy Hook. I remember when I was in middle school learning about that shooting, and it also like rocked my world. I mean, also when the spark of the March for Our Lives movement. So I deeply resonate with a lot of what the young folks were sharing. So excited to be here. For those that don't know Generation Vote or know me, my name is Brianna. I use she, her pronouns. And Generation Vote is a national organization sparking a movement of young people fighting for a right to vote and a just democracy for all. Generation Vote is a national home for young people to be trained and developed as leaders, fighting for just democracy for all in their communities through direct actions and legislative campaigns, advance innovative solutions to expand youth voting rights and civic engagement, and to build coalitions across the youth movement. So I've been a big fan of the Harvard Youth Poll ever since I was a student at SUNY Binghamton, which is where I started Generation Vote. SUNY Binghamton is a public school in upstate New York. And so I was just wondering, how did you decide to focus on Gen Z? What made you interested in my generation? And how did you choose those young people in the documentary to participate in these conversations?
Thanks, Brianna. It's a great story. I think I always say it's one of the most so the Institute of Politics is at Harvard, serves the undergraduate community. It is, I think, outside of athletics, it is the largest extracurricular activities. And way back 25 years ago, when the eldest members of the millennial generation were turning 18, 19 years old, 25 years ago, they noticed two things. And I'm still in contact with the two founders of this program, Aaron and Trevor. And they realized that it seemed like every member of their generation was involved in some meaningful way in community service. Mm-hmm. However, when they looked at the voting patterns from the most recent 1996 election, only a third of young people voted. And they didn't feel like, even at the Institute of Politics, that there was a lot of like interest in politics. So they asked the administration if they could conduct a survey and to try to understand this disconnect between volunteerism and voting. And the theory was, if young people appreciate the fact that you can do both things, you can volunteer and vote, and if you do those two things, perhaps we can more quickly and efficiently solve the challenges that that face the country. So I always kind of joke. I said back in those days there were 3 pollsters in Boston. You know, one was kind of too old on his way to retirement. One was too busy, so they asked me as a young guy, and they asked me to do it 1 semester. And I am so grateful and honored that 47 semesters later, we're still doing it. And it was really kind of designed to make, you know, to empower young people, you know, so elected officials and government and media would understand where they're coming from. So they'd have no excuses to address the issues that you care about if we basically presented that information in public. And it's incredible. I work with a few, 2-3 dozen students every semester, and they're the ones, Brianna, who really deserve all the credit. They're the ones who come up with the questions. They do the analysis. You know, some of them personally, you know, over the years, we've collaborated with Generation Vote, and it's just such an inspirational thing for me to be part of, and I'm really appreciative.
That's so cool to hear. Actually, I don't think I've heard the full origin story. And I remember actually referring to your poll when I was in my political science, public opinion 101 class as a student. So that's really cool to hear. And what I really appreciate about your poll is, like you mentioned, it is youth led, and that y'all really do lead with the issues that young people care about. And as you mentioned earlier, my generation, we are motivated by issues, right? And increasingly so, we are becoming unaffiliated with political parties, especially in places in the Southwest where we're seeing more independent or unaffiliated voters. And so I think a core learning and takeaway for folks on this call is that if you want to talk to my generation, you need to talk about the issues that we care about, which I think we heard about in the video. You know, so as a Gen Zer myself, and sometimes my Gen voters remind me that I'm a Zillennial. I love your thoughts on Zillennial as a micro generation. So for those of you that don't know Zillennials, we are the micro generation between Gen Z and Millennials. So I was born in 1997. But I culturally identify with Gen Z. I take in the same social media, the memes, you know. So I'm just wondering, to you, what makes Gen Z unique? Like, what makes Gen Z unique, even when compared to millennials, let alone millennial voters? And what are some of those key moments that you believe are so critical in understanding Gen Z's like origin story of political awakening?
It's a great question. And so, listen, I was a teenager when I met my then wife, and I had a family young, very young. So I have 3 kids, and my son just turned 30 last week, and he's a Zillennial. So let's talk about that for a second. Okay.
Yep.
The way I like the shorthand that I use, okay, the shorthand that I use is, do you remember 9/11 in a meaningful way? Okay, he's 30. His first day of school, his first day of first grade, or his first week was 9/11. Okay, his first homework assignment was a drawing of what that meant to him. We're in Boston, you know, and it was meaningful in many places, especially in Boston. But he didn't was able to grasp the enormity of it like someone a little bit older. Okay, so I put him in the Zillennial bucket, right? And then, you know, and based upon siblings and other things, maybe trend more millennial or more Gen Z kind of, or Zoomer, right? So that's kind of one way in which I think about that, right? One. The second thing is, politically speaking, that I don't think, I know there are no 2 generations who are more kind of aligned in their values than millennials and Gen Z. And I love it when I'm presenting to Gen Zers or Zillennials and you recognize like the things I'm saying, right? That gives me confidence that I'm still listening the right way. And together, your generation and the millennial generation will be almost 40% of the electorate. Significant number, right? Where your values are aligned, the difference is, I think, is kind of what I referenced a little bit earlier, is that Gen Zers have an urgency to them, right? They feel a lot of stress and a lot of pressure to basically kind of fix the problems that they tell me have been trickling down for generations that are now kind of on your shoulders or in your lap. So I think there's a lot that they have in common, but I think the degree to which they're using government and politics with that urgency, of course, you know, Maxwell Frost being a terrific example of that. I think that's probably one of the the bigger things. Of course, there are many differences based upon the use of social media and those aspects of it. Well, but I think the 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 um, the, the preparedness and the focus on solving these issues is one. And then the other thing is, I think just the openness. You know, like the first those like a lot of the clips you saw were in the initial moments of my group. Okay, they didn't know me. To your point, we recruited them um, like we would recruit a focus group. Okay, what I wanted to do was to essentially kind of select a dozen or so young people who represented a couple of communities, right? One that would represent Charlotte, one that would represent, Minneapolis, St. Paul. That was really the criteria. They were a mix of ideologies and level of interest and politics, those sorts of things. And we just wanted to understand their life a little bit more. And I think, who am I to give advice to kind of other, researchers? But when you have that kind of conversation, not about policy only, but about like your day-to-day life, you learn some pretty remarkable things when you sit back and have that conversation.
100%. And that's something, one of our principles at GenVote is to lead with authentic youth engagement. I think, and this is a principle that I think resonates with nonprofits, with candidates, with pollsters. I think people often say, Gen Z, we can see through the BS, y'all, right? And so we are an authentic generation. We are confident in the issues that drive us. And so we really appreciate, especially when older folks, including millennials, approach our generation with authenticity and want to generally understand what do we care about, and don't just come in hot with a partisan angle of like, for example, vote blue no matter who, right? Like so many of my Gen voters have told me that doesn't resonate with them when it comes to being motivated to participate in this election. And what I really loved about the clip, hearing the different issues that came up for folks, it mirrored very similarly to what we were hearing at Generation Vote during our 2023 Just Democracy for All tour. Last year, we did a tour in 6 different cities where we traveled the country to hear from young people, particularly on the challenges that they were facing when trying to cast their ballot, and what are the specific barriers that young people face when trying to vote. And we can talk about that later. But oftentimes, a lot of the issues that came up throughout the tour resonated with what folks were sharing in your film. And so I think for me, it was really eye-opening just to even see your focus group directly reflect so many of the challenges that young folks raise when thinking not only about the challenges when it comes to engaging with our democracy, but also what motivates them to participate in this democratic process. So I'm seeing in the chat, there's a lot of questions about issues. So like a lot of folks, it sounds like, are curious what are the issues that motivate Gen Z? And I know you touched on it a little bit earlier, but we'd love to hear from you a bit more of like, what are particular issues that resonate with Gen Z voters? And I know that some folks in the chat were asking specifically about 2 issues that I know I care about deeply and that my friends care about, which is climate justice, as well as the current situation in Gaza, so in Israel and Palestine. So just wondering what's come up for you in your research in terms of how different issues rank with Gen Z, and specifically, how do those 2 issues around climate justice and the current situation in Israel and Palestine resonate with young people?
Great. Obviously, both are very important issues. Specifically, when we talk about Israel and Gaza, younger people were the first to show sympathy, right? According to our poll and other polls, for folks on both sides. Clearly, they understood the atrocities in the early days. However, they could also see and had sympathy and empathy for folks, innocent folks on either side. And that is really, I think, the prism from which they see Israel and Gaza. They have far less sympathy, for the leaders of each of those of Palestine and Israel. So, and I also think that's the way in which they reacted to pulling out of Afghanistan, right? They could see the vulnerable being left behind, right? And that is really a key moment, I think, in politics of the last, 4 or 5 years, when, Biden's honeymoon was kind of very quickly interrupted in late summer of 2021. It was the youth concern about the vulnerable that I think really created some tension there between Democrats and younger people. So that's one. Climate, we have to be careful about, I think, in the political context, in terms of the words that we currently use, right? And because when I ask in polls how important issues related to climate change are, it's important. It's a top 15 issue. Okay. When I say how important is it to basically ensure access to clean air and clean water, it's number one or number two. Okay.
Right.
And in this environment, I think unfortunately, the term climate change, climate justice, the term, okay, is something that is beginning to divide some folks and put them into partisan camps. However, the values associated with climate justice, I think resonate. So for those of us who advocate for that, we just want to, I think, be thoughtful of the language that we use to kind of broaden kind of the experience of that, right? Having said that, both as important as both of those issues are, and they are very, very important, they pale in comparison to what we saw in that video. They pale in comparison to the deep, deep economic angst that millions of young people are dealing with, okay? We didn't recruit those people, as I said, for some proportion to be homeless, right?
Right.
A woman who was working 3 jobs who had recently been homeless in that group, okay? There's barely a group that I speak with in a focus group that hasn't deeply been affected by housing insecurity or worse, right? And these issues, I think, have a much greater effect than we can even imagine, because it doesn't give you confidence, to be good at school, your job, relationships. It stresses you out. We see that roughly half of younger people over the last couple of weeks have dealt with some pretty severe bouts of anxiety, hopelessness, or depression. And that economic instability by far is the #1 issue facing this country, and the interconnectivity around mental health, right? Right behind that, I think, is this obvious concern across all groups of gun violence and school shootings, right? Again, very often in my focus groups, I hear younger people who just don't go out anymore, right? Not just because of cost of living, but because of this fear. A woman said to me in a focus group the other night, I'm not afraid of being robbed. I'm not afraid of being raped. I'm afraid of being shot, and that's why I don't go out anymore. So those are the things. Yes, it is tragic, and all they want to do is be heard, right? And feel like someone is hearing them.
Yeah, and I know I actually want to dive a bit deeper into that, particularly on the economy and mental health. I mean, for context too, like I'm a young native New Yorker, and I'm not kidding y'all. Like it keeps me up at night when I think about the fact that I might not be able to own an apartment or be able to even live in my home city that I so deeply love. And it's not just me, it's like majority of my friends who are New Yorkers. I saw someone ask a question in the chat. I wonder if there's actually an answer to this, but I hear stories of young people, especially during the pandemic, moving abroad because cost of living and healthcare is just, it just seems unattainable for so many young people in this country. And so, and oftentimes when I talk to other folks too, like to your point about the issues that young people care about, and I mention the economy consistently as like the #1 issue, so many folks are like surprised by that fact because they often assume, oh, it's reproductive issues or it's gun violence, but really the economy, the past few election cycles has come up as a top issue. So in your conversations with these young folks or in your studies, how does my generation resonate, if at all, with this idea of like attaining the American dream? Like, do we think that's possible? And then you mentioned as a third question, mental health. So I'm just curious, like, has there been stuff coming up in your studies around the impact of mental health on youth political participation and motivation to actually engage in the political process?
Yeah, excellent question. So very few people believe the American dream, the traditional American dream, is is alive for them, and I spoke to a young man last week. He's in Pittsburgh, college grad. He's working as a bartender 3 nights a week. That's the only job that he can get right now. And he said, I can't believe that any member of my generation would be hopeful. He said, I can't find one thing to be hopeful about. And that was about the American dream. And he said, the only way I'll ever own a house is if my parents will it to me in their estate. And if they do, that's a burden because he needs to repair it. He doesn't have the money, right? That's the American, that's what I think he's emblematic of so many other people, right? So listen, I neglected to talk about reproductive health, abortion in that earlier answer, but I think climate, gun violence, reproductive health, healthcare that you mentioned, housing, like these are essentially kind of a series of rights and freedoms that most of us older folks have taken for granted, right? The right to like have clean air, clean water, access to healthcare, access to affordable, right? Access to college, you can work when I was, you could pretty much work a minimum wage job and afford a private college, if you were born in the 40s, 50s, 60s, or even early 70s, okay? Feeling safe in school, obviously reproductive health care. This is a series of rights that are on the precipice, right? So these are the things that motivate young people to participate. Mental health is a challenge, right? Because there is a cohort of people who, couple things, okay? One is that more people aren't following politics and therefore they're missing the positive, the good news that's happening, okay? Because politics is stressful and mental health is a challenge, and you can't really quit your job or end some relationship that easily. One of the things you can do is actually watch less news if it's stressing you out, okay? And you're missing some of the good positive news. So that's one way in which mental health is affecting like political news. The other way is there is a cohort of people who feel real agency, right? By volunteering or voting, okay? That is one way they can relieve some stress. So there's that aspect of it as well. But then it's complicated, right? And there's another group who feels so overwhelmed that there is no hope. And that goes into a cycle where they don't vote. So it's complicated, but what I think we can all do is actually, and this is super important, is we can remind our younger friends that that there's a tangible difference when young people vote, right? Without younger people, we don't have $170 billion of student debt relief. $170 billion. That's essentially 20% of the Pentagon budget. Without young people, we don't have the largest climate action plan in the history of the world. Without younger people, we don't have the first bipartisan gun violence prevention in 2 generations. Without young people, you don't have KBJ on the Supreme Court, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because without young people, Donald Trump is president, right? And you've got a different set of values there. So you don't have $35 insulin, et cetera, et cetera. So those I think are the things that we can all do to echo the important role that young people have already played in politics and continue to play.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you naming like just the anxiety that some of the young folks feel, especially, and I hear this all the time, in terms of young people that are new to organizing, they come to GenVote and they're like, I feel frustrated about all of the news I'm seeing around people trying to take away my right to vote, my freedom to vote, my freedom to like breathe clean air. And so, oftentimes at GenVote during our welcome calls, we actually start with like, how are y'all arriving? Like, how did you hear about GenVote? Was it just like you were angry or you were just curious? And just kind of starting there. And I do think a piece of advice I would offer to folks on this call is that one of the most effective ways to engage young people long-term and to create a sustainable movement of youth power is to invest in creating political homes for young people, right? It's one thing to build out amazing get out the vote efforts and voter registration drives to engage young people, but what does it mean to actually build political homes and community year round, where these young folks are building networks and relationships with other young people that they can activate with, and also just process everything that we are experiencing as Gen Z. And that's something that we do at GenVote, where we have a whole chapter building program where we work with our young folks to start GenVote teams and hubs, whether it be at a high school, at a college, in a rural county, or in a city, so that they have this community of young folks that they can build with. And it certainly has alleviated a lot of anxiety that I think our Gen voters have at least felt when engaging in this work. You mentioned about the news, and actually I also resonated with that, because like, yeah, I'm a political organizer. This is my work. Like, I do this professionally, and I don't watch cable news. Like, I don't know the last time I watched cable news. I get all my news mostly through social media, through like little news summaries every morning. So just curious, like, where do y'all see young people getting our news? And I have a few more follow-up questions that I see folks asking in the chat, but let's start there. Where, if young folks are not tuning in maybe to big cable news because they're getting stressed out, where are we actually getting our news and informing ourselves of what's going on?
I should be asking you that question, but this is what I'll say. You tell me if I'm heading in the right direction or not, right? So I think it's complicated. I think it's a combination of basically, you know, 3 or 4 big places, right? In no particular order. YouTube, and this might be news, right, to some of the other members of the audience tonight, right? YouTube plays an incredibly important role. I recently did a study asking people, young people, this exact question. I'd give them some questions like, if you were to research this topic or this event, where would you go? YouTube, more and more often. And including like what they would call longer form videos, 10, 15-minute videos on YouTube. So that's a big part one. And we know how dangerous that algorithm can be, right? Based upon what you're searching for, especially younger boys, younger men, right? So let's remember that one. Obviously, there is this network effect, right, between YouTube and then, of course, TikTok, which is the primary place. And, you know, TikTok isn't evil. I mean, a lot of people go to TikTok to just take a break from the everyday, you know, stress and monotony to see something fun for a minute, right? So, you know, so there's value in that, okay, right? I think one. And then you have Reddit, you know, Reddit, I hear, you know, a lot of people, but you also have Twitch and Discord, these kind of gaming platforms and gaming communities where, you know, probably much more male than female, but you have this ecosystem, you know, between YouTube, TikTok, other social media, and then, you know, kind of these kind of gaming communities, and Reddit boards and other things. So to me, those are like, when you think about social media, you have to like think about those 3 areas of media and understand kind of interplay around that. So I think that's a big part of it. Young people still watch some local news, right? They still need to see traffic and weather. That plays a role. You know, the campaigns are reaching them a variety of ways. Still, you can buy advertising on YouTube streaming, Hulu, Roku, other things. But that's, I think, in terms of some examples of where opinion is shaped and influenced by.
Oh, I love that. I mean, I totally resonate. Like my For You page, y'all, it's really fascinating. Like I go on it, and then I'll have like a very serious political news update. I know Washington Post, they've had some really funny interns running their TikTok that also distills news very quickly in a way that is funny and relatable. So I'll have a very serious topic, and the next thing you know, I'm watching something about cats, or like, I don't know, some sort of video about my favorite influencers doing something stupid, right? So I definitely think that's super real with so many young folks. And I know that this has been a hot topic, like reporters, like people ask me this all the time. And so I was wondering, like, tell us a bit more about how you think things have changed in terms of my generation's enthusiasm voting after Biden dropped out and when Kamala became the Democratic nominee for president. And do you think like the meme culture, the gratification of the election is actually making a difference? And so we talked a bit about the different types of platforms, but once people engage on these platforms, they're seeing all of these memes of coconut trees and very mindful, very demure videos. And so are these actually making a difference in terms of reaching out to young voters?
So there's no nuance in this Harvard poll, okay? By every metric, she is doing appreciably better than President Biden. It's just a fact, okay? That's one. The second thing is, in the Harvard poll, we actually asked that exact question about memes, okay? 50%, 53, 53%, I think, had seen a Kamala Harris meme the last couple of weeks. 56% had seen a Trump meme the last couple of weeks, by almost a 2-to-1 margin. Those memes have given people a more positive opinion of Kamala and a more negative opinion of Trump. Okay, so they are influencing public opinion, but more than that, this is how I think about the kind of the evolution of Kamala Harris's campaign over the last couple of months, right? Stage one was Brad Summer, right? And the enthusiasm that younger people, especially younger women, showed was contagious, right? Millions of younger people wanted to be part of something bigger than themselves, bigger than a campaign, part of that movement, right? By echoing their kind of connection with her. And it wasn't just a connection on politics, right? It was a connection on culture, right? And it was, some people got connected over the cooking, or the dancing or the music, but that's an important first step in terms of the relatability, that people want to vote for someone who thinks they can kind of be connected to, understand them, or empathetic, etc. So that was like phase one. Phase two, enter the Chicago period, the Democratic National Convention, where she spoke largely to the base, a lot of younger people there, and she shared her values, her vision, her background, who she associates with. Big success as well, building upon that, right? And then the question is, okay, I connect with her values, I like her vision, can she do the job? So then she goes to the debate, and she, basically wiped the floor with the former president, and people could envision her, sitting behind the Resolute desk, right? So chapter one, memes, chapter two, DNC, chapter three, the debate. She killed all three of those things, right? And now she's in the fourth phase where she needs to get specific. She's sitting down, she's doing interviews, she's talking in detail about her economic plans, etc. And we'll see how that's going. It seems to be going pretty well, and I think that's how you understand these things. The memes are part. I don't know if they're part of a strategy or not, but they certainly played an important role, I think, in her development as a candidate, and her campaign being somewhere between a campaign and movement right now.
100%. Yeah. And I'm looking at the time, and probably I think I have time for maybe one or two more questions. So we can maybe combine these two. But yeah, I guess similar to the memification of presidential election, as folks may know, we exist in the context of all that comes before us. And so one thing I often hear is like, okay, young people are excited, they're registering to vote, but like, how can we actually close the voter registration gap to turnout? And sometimes people make these comments of like, oh, well, young people are actually just apathetic, and like, yeah, we register them to vote, but they may not actually turn out. That's like a myth that you and I are constantly debunking, right? Through your polls, through my work on the ground. And so the intervention that at GenVote we're making is to actually educate folks that that's not true. And in fact, in many places across the country, our generation is facing specific barriers when it comes to actually going out and casting that vote. There are people in power who are trying to make it harder for young people to vote, whether it be taking polling locations off college campuses, eliminating student IDs as valid voter identification documents, all sorts of attacks that we've been seeing specifically on young voters to try to make it harder for us to exercise our right to vote. And so at GenVote, we are building a movement of young people making democracy and electoral justice a major priority for our generation, so we can protect every other freedom that we care about. And so from your perspective, are there specific challenges or things that you think young voters need to know when they are excited, they're registered, and they need to actually go out and vote? What are those particular barriers or information that young people need to actually go out and make their voice heard?
Great question. So I think because of you and so many others, there's never enough, but there's a lot of good work in terms of the how to vote, okay? But what we also need to do is we need to tell people why to vote, okay? So about 40% of younger Americans, I did some very sophisticated modeling, and to make it a long story short, there are two groups of people, okay, that are fence sitters, may or may not vote. One group I call show me voters, okay? Show me that it matters. Show me why I should show up. I showed up last time. You know what? I don't have access to abortion care anymore. Why does it matter again? Okay. So we need to show young voters the difference in participation makes. I talked about a lot of those accomplishments earlier. That's one group. That's a pretty big group. Okay. Like 30% of people. There's another group that I call Teach Me. Okay, who didn't have a strong civics education or background, right? And I talk to them all the time. They're embarrassed, okay? They see folks who are committed to voting and they're afraid to ask questions such as, which party really cares about reproductive health? Which party is this or that? Basic questions, right? About what Democrat versus Republican is, about the impact that voting can have on certain issues. So there's a cohort of folks who are Teach Me people. They're people who probably aren't part on a college campus, okay, have basic questions, but are good people and want to vote. We just need to like teach them some of the basics. What's the electoral college? These are the kinds of questions that they have, right? Do I need to fill out the entire ballot? Okay, just choose 2 or 3 things, all right? Is this a test, right? Basic questions. And then you have the show me the difference it makes, right? So when we think about younger people, 15% are basically like you, right? You vote, your friends vote, it's a part of who you are. But there's basically another half that are split between these two groups that are on the fence. And there's another third that are probably out of reach the cycle. They're not going to vote, but we do need to make sure that we're having similar conversations with them moving forward.
100%. Yeah. I love, actually, I was taking notes myself. I might use that too, John, in my organizing, like, show me the money, show me how you're going to cancel my student debt, right? Like, I love that. But also very much Teach Me is something that's actually a lot of Gen voters that come to us. They're excited to not only learn about their right to vote, but also go out there and teach others about their voting rights. And one thing we're doing at GenVote is a program called GenVote Defenders, which is a national youth-led election protection program. So we can mobilize hundreds of young people to make sure that we are educating our peers of their voting rights this election cycle. So I know we're coming up at time, and I appreciate the calls to action that Kitty's been dropping in the chat. But yeah, I guess so. Thank you for talking with me today. I had a lot of fun, and I definitely encourage you all to check out the poll. It's a really awesome resource, and thanks for having us tonight.
Thank you.
This was such a great conversation, and we're so grateful to both of you. I hope everyone goes to Generation Vote and takes a look. And if you want to buy that sweatshirt, I did put the link in the chat for that. And John, I am the mother of 2 Gen Zers, and so I really appreciate you valuing who these young people are. I do want to close with do something. So please go to our website and ask for those letters to Gen Z voters to hopefully get them over the hurdle to vote. And Monica Rodriguez had a great quote, which was she wanted to thank the Gen Z generation for saving us in 2020. So I think I'm going to end on that. I really love that. And they might save us again, women in Gen Z. So everyone, hope to see you soon at BigTent. John and Brianna, for all your time, effort, and everything you're doing for us, for our democracy and our children. We really appreciate it and hope to see you all very soon under the tent.